Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. The flight had been delayed 3 hours, then mysteriously cleared for an early departure. Sometimes the universe throws you curveballs that seem like inconveniences until you realize they're actually lifelines. I pulled into my driveway at 9:47 p.m. instead of the planned midnight arrival, noting the unusual cluster of cars lining the street. For vehicles I recognized from various neighborhood gatherings, all belonging to women from Emma's social circle. The front windows glowed warmly against the October darkness, and I could hear the animated buzz of multiple conversations drifting through the glass. Nothing unusual about Emma having friends over, except for the intensity of the discussion and the fact that she hadn't mentioned any gathering when we'd talked that afternoon. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk and approached the front door, fishing for my keys while listening to the cadence of voices inside. There was something different about this conversation. Not the comfortable rhythm of friends catching up or the organized chaos of a book club discussion. This had the focused energy of a meeting, like people working together toward a specific goal. The key turned silently in the lock, and I pushed the door open just wide enough to step inside. The conversation was coming from the kitchen, and as I moved closer, individual words began to crystallize from the general chatter. Has to ask permission for anything over $25. Checking his location every hour is totally reasonable. Weekly performance reviews keep them accountable. I froze in the hallway, my bag still in hand. That was Emma's voice delivering what sounded suspiciously like relationship advice. Except it didn't sound like advice. It sounded like instructions. Moving closer to the kitchen doorway, I positioned myself where I could observe without being seen. The scene that greeted me was both familiar and completely alien. 5 women sat around our kitchen table, notebooks and printed articles scattered across the surface like research materials. Emma occupied the head of the table, animated and engaged in a way I rarely saw anymore, gesturing with a pen as she spoke to her audience. Monica's system has been working perfectly, Emma announced, looking at the woman to her right. 3 weeks of implementation and her husband hasn't made a single unauthorized purchase. Monica, recently divorced and perpetually bitter about her ex-husband's supposed financial irresponsibility, preened at the praise. The key is consistency. No exceptions, no negotiations. They need structure, and we're the ones who have to provide it. Lisa, married 15 years to a man who worked 60-hour weeks to support their family, nodded enthusiastically. I implemented the social media monitoring last month. Downloaded an app that tracks all his online activity. You wouldn't believe how much time he was wasting on sports websites. That's brilliant, said Amanda, the newlywed who'd been married all of 8 months. I'm definitely adding that to my list. Prevention is so much better than correction. The 4th woman, Jennifer, was technically separated from her husband, but seemed to be using the group to validate her grievances rather than work toward reconciliation. The location tracking is essential, she declared. Men lie about where they are constantly. This way you always know the truth. I stood there in my own hallway, listening to 5 women discuss their husbands like they were discussing problem children who needed behavioral modification. These weren't strangers. These were women I'd welcomed into my home, shared meals with, made polite conversation with at various social functions. And now they were sitting in my kitchen, creating systems for controlling and monitoring their spouses. The beauty of the system, Monica was explaining with evangelical fervor, is that it creates natural consequences. When they follow the rules, they get privileges. When they don't, they lose them. It's basic psychology. Like training a dog, Jennifer added with a laugh that made my skin crawl. Exactly. Lisa agreed enthusiastically. Positive reinforcement and negative consequences. Men respond to clear structure because they're naturally less emotionally intelligent than women. Emma nodded sagely. We're essentially parenting our husbands into better versions of themselves. Someone has to take responsibility for their development. Amanda was scribbling notes frantically. This is so empowering. I feel like I'm finally taking control of my marriage instead of just hoping things work out. Control is the key word, Monica emphasized. Women have been too passive in relationships for too long. We've been raised to think that men will naturally become better partners on their own, but the evidence shows otherwise. The divorce statistics prove it. Jennifer chimed in. 50% of marriages fail because women don't establish proper boundaries and expectations from the beginning. Lisa leaned forward conspiratorially. I read this article about how successful CEOs manage their employees. The same principles apply to marriage. Clear objectives, regular performance reviews, documented expectations, and accountability measures. That's brilliant, Emma said, her eyes lighting up. We should incorporate actual business management techniques. KPIs for husbands. Key performance indicators. Monica translated for Amanda's benefit. Measurable goals that we can track and evaluate. Things like frequency of unprompted household contributions, quality of communication during discussions, demonstration of gratitude and appreciation. The group was building momentum now, feeding off each other's ideas like a creative brainstorming session for the worst possible marriage advice. We need to think about data collection too, Lisa suggested. Screenshots of questionable social media activity, receipts for unauthorized purchases, documentation of time spent on non-productive activities. Yes, Jennifer exclaimed. Evidence-based relationship management. No more relying on their word or trusting them to self-report accurately. Emma was practically bouncing in her chair. This could revolutionize marriage. Imagine if every wife had these tools from day one. Think of how many relationships we could save. Save from what? Amanda asked innocently. From men's natural tendency towards selfishness and irresponsibility. Monica explained with the patience of a teacher addressing a slow student. Left to their own devices, men will always choose the path of least resistance. They need external motivation to become the partners we deserve. Emma pulled out her phone and showed the screen to the group. Look at this text from Sarah. She read aloud. Had to ask my husband permission to buy coffee today. Rule number 1 working perfectly. He's actually grateful for the structure now. The group erupted in pleased murmurs and congratulations, like they'd just heard about a successful scientific experiment. We should formalize this, Monica suggested, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who'd found her calling. Create an actual handbook that other wives can use. I'm thinking we call it Marriage Management, a modern wife's guide to creating structure. Yes, Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. We could start a blog, maybe even write a book. There are so many women who need this kind of guidance. Lisa was already taking notes. We need categories: financial control, social monitoring, time management, accountability systems. Don't forget appearance standards, Jennifer added. Men have no sense of how their choices reflect on their wives. Someone needs to make those decisions for them. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't a casual conversation among friends. This was an organized effort to create systems of control and manipulation, and my wife was leading the charge. These women had convinced themselves they were relationship experts when they were actually just control freaks feeding off each other's validation. The conversation continued to spiral into increasingly disturbing territory. The hardest part, Emma was explaining, is breaking their initial resistance to structure. Men will always push back against accountability at first because they've been conditioned to believe they deserve unconditional freedom. That's why the financial controls are so effective, Monica added with satisfaction. Money talks. When they realize that their access to discretionary spending depends on compliance, the resistance usually crumbles pretty quickly. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. I've seen dramatic improvement in my husband's behavior since implementing the allowance system. He actually asks my opinion now before making decisions. Asks or requests permission? Jennifer clarified with a smirk. Requests permission, Lisa corrected with obvious pride. Which is exactly what it should be. Amanda looked concerned. But what if they just refuse to participate? What if they say the whole system is unreasonable? The group exchanged knowing looks, clearly having anticipated this question. That's where community enforcement becomes crucial, Monica explained. Isolated resistance is much harder to maintain than unified resistance. When multiple wives in a social circle implement similar standards, it normalizes the expectations. Peer pressure, Emma translated. If all their friends' wives have the same rules, they can't dismiss it as one woman being unreasonable. It becomes the new normal. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. And if they still resist, you escalate to social consequences. Make it clear that their behavior reflects on you, and that you're not willing to be embarrassed by their selfishness in front of other couples. Lisa was taking detailed notes now. What about the wives who aren't on board with implementing structure? How do we handle that? Education, Monica said firmly. Some women have been so conditioned to accept poor treatment that they don't even recognize they deserve better. We help them see what's possible when you actually take control of your relationship. And if they still refuse to hold their husbands accountable? Amanda asked. Then they're part of the problem, Emma said with surprising coldness. Women who enable bad behavior in men aren't just hurting themselves. They're making it harder for the rest of us to maintain proper standards. Emma was explaining her latest innovation. I've been tracking his spending patterns for 6 months now. Created a spreadsheet that categorizes every purchase by necessity level. Anything marked questionable requires discussion. Discussion or permission? Monica asked pointedly. Permission, Emma clarified, and the satisfaction in her voice was unmistakable. He's actually thanked me for helping him become more responsible with money. Amanda was writing furiously. This is so helpful. I want to prevent bad habits before they start. What other areas should I be monitoring? Everything, Jennifer said flatly. Communication, entertainment choices, food decisions, exercise habits, social interactions. Men need guidance in all areas, or they'll just default to their worst impulses. The group murmured agreement, completely absorbed in their project of systematic control. They were building something together, feeding off each other's ideas and validation, creating an echo chamber where controlling behavior was not only normalized but celebrated. I'd heard enough. Actually, I'd heard far more than enough. Setting my bag down silently, I walked into the kitchen with the casual confidence of someone coming home to find unexpected company. Hey, honey, I said, adopting a mildly surprised tone. Didn't expect to find a party going on. The conversation stopped abruptly. Emma's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally forced brightness. Connor, you're home early. The flight must have been changed. Last-minute opening, I confirmed, looking around the table with polite interest. Ladies, good to see you all. Don't let me interrupt. Sounded like an interesting discussion from the hallway. Monica recovered first, her natural arrogance overriding any caution. We were just sharing some relationship strategies. Things that have been working well for improving marriages. Relationship strategies, I repeated, noting how they all seemed to be studying my reaction. That sounds productive. What kind of strategies? Emma jumped in eagerly, apparently interpreting my calm response as an opportunity. We've been researching ways to create more structure in marriages. Better communication, clearer expectations, that sort of thing. Structure, I said, pulling out the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Emma. I'm intrigued. Mind if I hear some examples? The women exchanged glances, but their confidence was already returning. They'd been so absorbed in their mutual validation that they'd convinced themselves their ideas were not only reasonable, but obvious improvements that any rational person would appreciate. Lisa leaned forward, eager to share her expertise. Well, for instance, we've found that financial transparency is crucial. Husbands should check with their wives before making any significant purchases. How significant are we talking? I asked with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Anything over $25, Monica announced proudly. It prevents impulse buying and ensures household funds are used responsibly. $25, I repeated slowly. That would include lunch, gas, groceries, pretty much any daily expense. Exactly, Amanda chimed in. It creates mindfulness about spending. Men don't naturally think about the household impact of their choices. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this wisdom. What other areas have you identified as needing structure? The question energized them. They began talking over each other, eager to showcase their comprehensive approach to marriage improvement. Social media monitoring, Jennifer announced. There are apps that track all online activity. No more wondering what they're really doing on their phones. Location sharing, added Lisa. Real-time GPS tracking so you always know where they are. It eliminates the possibility of deception. Weekly performance reviews, Emma said with particular pride. Structured conversations about what's working and what needs improvement, with actual scoring systems. Scoring systems, I said, maintaining my interested tone. Like report cards? Exactly like report cards, Monica confirmed. with consequences for poor performance. Privileges get revoked until improvement is demonstrated. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the full scope of what they'd created. This is remarkably comprehensive. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this system. Emma beamed at what she interpreted as approval. We've been working on it for months, testing different approaches, refining the methods based on results. And it's working? I asked. Beautifully, Lisa said. My husband actually told me he appreciates having clearer guidelines. Men want structure, they just don't know how to create it for themselves. That's fascinating, I said, and meant it. Not because their system was brilliant, but because they'd managed to convince themselves that controlling behavior was actually a service they were providing to their husbands. The research supports everything we're doing, Monica said with academic authority. Studies show that men have lower emotional intelligence and require more external structure to function effectively in relationships. Which studies? I asked with genuine curiosity. Monica looked momentarily flustered. Well, there are multiple sources. Psychology Today, relationship blogs, women's magazines. The evidence is everywhere if you know where to look. Interesting, I said. And these studies recommend spousal surveillance and financial control as therapeutic interventions? Not in those exact terms, Lisa interjected quickly. But the underlying principles are the same. Structure, accountability, clear boundaries. The way we implement the principles is our own innovation, Emma added proudly. We've taken proven psychological concepts and applied them to modern marriage challenges. I nodded thoughtfully. So you've essentially created an experimental treatment program for relationship dysfunction, with yourselves as the researchers and your husbands as the test subjects? The women exchanged glances, clearly not comfortable with that particular framing. It's not experimental when we know it works, Jennifer said defensively. We have measurable results. Improved compliance, reduced conflict, better household management. Compliance, I repeated slowly. That's an interesting word choice for describing a marriage partner's behavior. You know what I mean? Jennifer backpedaled. Cooperation, participation, engagement with household responsibilities. Through monitoring and consequences, I clarified. Through structure and accountability, Monica corrected firmly. The same tools that successful businesses use to manage employees. And your husbands have agreed to be managed like employees in their own marriages? I asked. Another uncomfortable silence. They don't need to explicitly agree, Emma said finally. Sometimes people need structure whether they think they want it or not. Like children who resist bedtimes but sleep better when they have them. So you're treating your husbands like children who don't know what's good for them. We're treating them like partners who need guidance to reach their full potential, Lisa said with forced patience. Every successful person has mentors and coaches. We're essentially serving as relationship coaches for our husbands. Unpaid, uncredentialed relationship coaches who use surveillance and financial control as coaching techniques, I observed. Jennifer pulled out a printed document. We've documented everything. Categories, implementation strategies, enforcement mechanisms. It's like a complete manual for creating accountability in marriage. Enforcement mechanisms, I repeated. What happens if someone doesn't comply with the structure? The women's eyes lit up at the question. This was clearly their favorite part. Financial consequences, Monica said immediately. Reduction in discretionary spending, elimination of personal purchases. Social consequences, added Amanda. No socializing privileges until compliance improves. Public accountability, Jennifer continued. We've found that involving other couples creates community pressure that's very effective. Emma nodded enthusiastically. The key is consistency. No exceptions, no negotiations. Once you start making exceptions, the whole system breaks down. I sat there listening to 5 women describe their systematic approach to controlling their husbands, all while sitting 3 feet away from me in my own kitchen. The casual nature of it was almost more disturbing than the content itself. They'd normalized this behavior so completely that they saw nothing wrong with discussing it in front of one of their intended targets. You know, I said, standing up slowly. This has been really educational. I appreciate you sharing your research with me. Emma looked pleased. Of course, we're hoping more couples will adopt these strategies. The results speak for themselves. They certainly do, I agreed. In fact, I'm so impressed with your systematic approach that I'd like to contribute a rule of my own. The women looked at each other, clearly not having expected this development. Monica recovered first. What kind of rule? I walked to the head of the table where Emma was sitting, noting how all 5 women tracked my movement with suddenly heightened attention. Something in my demeanor had shifted, though they couldn't quite identify what. Just one simple rule, I said, my voice carrying a finality that hadn't been there moments before. Rule number 1 for wives who think they have the right to create behavioral controls for their husbands. Emma's smile was becoming uncertain. What's the rule, honey? I looked directly at her, then slowly around the table at each of her co-conspirators. Rule number 1, pack a bag. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and I could see each woman processing the implications in real time. What do you mean? Emma asked, though her voice suggested she understood exactly what I meant. I mean, I said with perfect calm, that any woman who believes she has the authority to create rules for controlling her husband has chosen to be single. The marriage ended the moment you decided I needed to be managed like a defective child who couldn't be trusted to make basic decisions. Monica tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. Connor, we were just brainstorming. It's not like we were serious about implementing. Really, I interrupted, pulling out my phone, because I heard Emma mention testing and refining methods based on results. That sounds pretty serious to me. I opened my contacts and found the first number I was looking for. Let me check with your husband about how unserious this all is. No, Monica practically shrieked. Don't call him. He doesn't need to know about this. Doesn't need to know? I raised an eyebrow. That his wife has been meeting with other women to create systems for controlling him? I think that's exactly the kind of thing he needs to know. Jennifer was backing toward the door. This is getting blown out of proportion. We were just talking, just sharing ideas. Ideas about financial control, location tracking, performance reviews, and enforcement mechanisms, I said, scrolling through my contacts. Let me call your husband too. I'm sure he'd be interested to hear about the accountability systems you've been developing. Please don't, Jennifer whispered, and the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Lisa was crying now. My husband will think I'm crazy. He works so hard for our family, and if he finds out I was planning to monitor his every move, then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent months creating systems to treat him like a suspected criminal, I said without sympathy. I found Lisa's husband's number and held up the phone. Should I tell him about the spending monitoring and social media tracking? Or would you prefer to explain it yourself? Stop, Emma said, standing up abruptly. Just stop. This isn't what it looks like. I turned to face my wife directly. What does it look like, Emma? It looks like, she started, then stopped, apparently realizing there was no way to spin hours of documented planning into something innocent. It looks like you've been systematically planning to control and monitor my behavior, I finished for her. It looks like you've been treating our marriage like a management project where you get to make unilateral decisions about my freedom and autonomy. Amanda was sobbing quietly. We were trying to improve our marriages. We thought if we created better structure. You thought if you created better control, I corrected. Don't dress this up as improvement when it's really about power and domination. I started dialing the first number. Monica's husband answered on the second ring. Hey, Tom, it's Connor. Sorry to call so late, but your wife is at my house, and I thought you should know what she's been up to. Connor, please, Monica started. She's been working with other wives to create rules for controlling their husbands. Financial monitoring, location tracking, social media surveillance. Thought you might want to hear about it directly from her. I handed the phone to Monica, whose face had gone completely white. The conversation that followed was brief and heated, ending with Tom demanding she come home immediately. As Monica gathered her things with shaking hands, I was already dialing the next number. Lisa's husband deserves to know about the spending spreadsheets and online activity monitoring, I announced, watching Lisa collapse into her chair. Please, Lisa begged. He'll never trust me again. He shouldn't trust you, I said bluntly. You've been planning to spy on him for months. Trust is exactly what you've been systematically destroying. The phone call with Lisa's husband went similarly. By the time I hung up, Lisa was openly sobbing and Jennifer was halfway out the door. Where are you going, Jennifer? I called after her. Don't you want to explain to your husband about the enforcement mechanisms and public accountability strategies? She stopped in the doorway, turning back with pure panic in her eyes. We're separated. This doesn't affect anyone. Separated because you've been treating him like a child who needs constant supervision? I asked. Because if these are the kinds of improvements you brought to that marriage, I'm starting to understand why he left. Jennifer fled without another word. Amanda was the only one left besides Emma, and she was crying too hard to speak coherently. I looked at her with something approaching pity. You've been married 8 months, I said gently. 8 months, and you're already planning surveillance systems and behavioral controls. Do you understand how that sounds? She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I don't want to make the same mistakes other wives make. I thought if I could prevent problems before they started. The only problem you're going to prevent is having a husband, I told her. Because no man with any self-respect is going to tolerate being treated like a parolee in his own marriage. I handed her my phone. Call your husband. Tell him what you've been planning. Let him decide if he wants to be married to someone who sees him as a project to be managed. Amanda took the phone with trembling hands, but couldn't bring herself to dial. Finally, she set it down and ran out of the house, leaving Emma and me alone in the kitchen. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Emma stood at the other end of the table, looking small and lost, surrounded by the scattered remnants of her grand plan for marriage improvement. Connor, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I can explain. Can you? I asked, sitting back down in my chair. Because I've been listening to explanations for the last hour, and every single one has made this worse. We weren't really going to implement everything, she said desperately. It was more like theoretical discussion, exploring possibilities. I picked up one of the notebooks from the table and flipped through pages of detailed plans, implementation timelines, and success metrics. This doesn't look theoretical to me. This looks like a business plan for domestic control. Emma's face crumpled. I got caught up in the group dynamic. They were so confident, so sure they knew how to fix relationship problems. I wanted to fit in, to be part of something that felt important. So you were willing to sacrifice our marriage to impress a group of women who are clearly toxic to their own relationships? I asked. I didn't think of it that way, she said, tears starting to flow. I thought I was learning how to be a better wife. A better wife? I repeated slowly. You thought spying on me, controlling my spending, and treating me like a child who needs performance reviews would make you a better wife. She had no answer for that. The absurdity of it was too obvious now that she was forced to confront it without the echo chamber validation of her friends. Emma, I said, my voice gentler but no less firm. I need you to understand something. This marriage works because we respect each other. The moment you decided I needed to be managed and controlled was the moment you stopped respecting me. And without respect, we don't have a marriage. But we can fix this, she said frantically. I'll tell the group I'm not interested anymore. I'll delete all the documents, throw away the notes. That's not the problem, I interrupted. The problem is that you thought this was acceptable in the first place. The problem is that you spent months planning ways to control me and never once considered that it might be wrong. She stared at me across the table, finally beginning to understand the gravity of what she'd done. What do you want me to do? I want you to make a choice, I said. You can continue down this path of thinking you know better than me about how our marriage should work, or you can remember that marriage is supposed to be a partnership between equals. I choose partnership, she said immediately. Do you? I asked. Because choosing partnership means acknowledging that you don't have the right to make unilateral decisions about my behavior. It means accepting that I'm an adult who can manage his own life without your supervision. It means trusting me enough to not need surveillance and control systems. Emma nodded frantically. Yes, I understand that now. I see how wrong I was. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she truly grasped what had happened here. Emma, those women who just left here, they're going home to face the consequences of their choices. Some of those marriages are going to end tonight. Others are going to be damaged in ways that take years to repair. Is that really what you want for us? No, she whispered. That's not what I want at all. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the dark street where the last of the cars was pulling away. When I turned back to face Emma, I saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before, genuine understanding of how close she'd come to losing everything. Rule number 1 isn't a threat, Emma, I said quietly. It's a boundary. The moment you decided I needed to be controlled was the moment you chose to end this marriage. I'm giving you one opportunity to choose differently." She looked at the scattered papers on the table, then back at me. "What do I need to do?" "You need to understand that respect isn't something you can fake or force. You either see me as an equal partner worthy of trust, or you see me as a problem to be managed. There's no middle ground." Emma walked over to the table and began gathering up all the notebooks, printouts, and planning documents. Without a word, she carried them to the kitchen trash can and dropped them in. Then she looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I let those women convince me that controlling you was the same as loving you. I'm sorry I spent months planning ways to treat you like a child. And I'm sorry I was too caught up in their validation to see how wrong it all was." I watched her for a long moment, evaluating whether this was genuine remorse or just fear of consequences. Finally, I nodded. "We can rebuild from here," I said. "But it's going to require you to do some serious thinking about why you thought any of this was acceptable in the first place." 6 months later, Emma and I were stronger than we'd been in years. She'd cut all contact with the group that had led her so far astray, and we'd spent the time working on rebuilding the trust and respect that their toxic influence had eroded. Monica's marriage ended within 2 weeks. Tom filed for divorce after discovering the extent of her surveillance and control plans. Lisa's husband moved out for 3 months before agreeing to counseling. Jennifer's separation became permanent. Amanda's marriage barely survived after her husband discovered she'd been planning to monitor his every move before their first anniversary. Emma learned that respect and trust are the foundation of partnership, not control and surveillance. She learned that healthy relationships don't require management systems, enforcement mechanisms, or performance reviews. Most importantly, she learned that some boundaries are non-negotiable, and crossing them has real consequences. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. That being willing to walk away from something you value is sometimes the only way to save it. And that rule number 1, pack a bag, isn't about ending relationships. It's about making sure the relationships that survive are built on respect rather than control. The marriage survived because both of us chose to respect rather than control. But it only survived because I was willing to let it end if that respect couldn't be restored. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone you love is that you won't tolerate being treated badly, even by them. Emma understands that now, and our marriage is better for it.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.